The elderly often go unnoticed. Seventh-day Adventists, in partnership with Adventist Active Centers, are reaching out to bring hope and connection to seniors, especially within the ethnic Chinese community. In early 2023, a new initiative focusing on Christ Method was launched. Care groups were established, creating spaces where people felt welcomed to visit. Among them was 72-year-old Amy Leong, who quickly became an integral part of the growing community.
The first time I went there, I had no idea what we would do. I just tried to have a positive mindset. There were friends of a similar age with me. We sang songs and we played games.
Amy's husband, Simon Jiang, was initially reluctant to attend, but by the end of the year, he too began joining her regularly. Along with spiritual support, social activities are offered, providing opportunities for seniors to engage, build relationships, and experience a sense of community. Both Amy and Simon were non-believers when they first joined, but as they continued to attend care group meetings and worship services, God's Spirit softened their hearts. Today, they are actively engaged in Bible studies with Pastor Kevin Tain and have shown interest in answering the call of baptism. In bustling cities like Singapore, seniors often face loneliness and isolation, feeling disconnected from their communities. With family members busy or living far away and fewer opportunities for meaningful social interactions, many elderly individuals struggle with feelings of neglect and solitude.
There are times when I feel unhappy, but I feel better when I go to church and sing.
Amy is passionate about sharing her experience with others. She has already invited her sister, a friend, and even tried to bring her son and granddaughter to join Bible studies and worship services. The care group has grown remarkably, and it continues to expand through our spiritual outreach. Please continue to pray for Amy, Simon, and the others on this journey as they explore their faith and prepare for baptism. Thank you for supporting Mission.
I always enjoy watching these. They always give me new things to think about. They also add something to add to my prayer list. Let's go ahead and take up our offering for today for us to help support the missions. And let's bow our heads. Our Father, thank you for being with us. Thank you for bringing us to church today. Thank you for the blessings that you have gifted us. Help us to remember to give with a glad heart, and help that the offerings collected today go to the purpose that you intend. In Jesus' name, amen. This quarter, the lessons have been interesting. They're on the first blush seem to be like little pearls on a string, and they don't touch each other. There's a little knot between each pearl, and they kind of are separated. They kind of are together, and if you stop and think about it, they do kind of cohesively stick together, and it helps us broaden our mind a little bit, at least it has mine, on a little bit of expanding what I think of as prophecy. This week we continue to explore stories that prefigure last day events. By using real life events and people, God helps us see things from His perspective and help us understand how to interpret the prophecies that come later. And they are given to help strengthen our faith. And just a few of what we've studied this quarter are Noah and the flood, Genesis, marriage, nations like Nimrod, Nineveh, Israel, Daniel, and we're continuing with that. critics of the Christian faith have often pointed to the brutal reality of living in this world as evidence that A, God doesn't exist, B, he's powerless to intervene when bad things happen, or he doesn't care when we hurt. Many of the stories in the Bible, however, provide abundant evidence that none of these assumptions are correct. True, God is allowing the human race to reap the consequences of rebellion against him, but without violating our free will. He is always present, always working in human history, all moving us towards the ultimate resolution of the problems of sin and suffering. And the stories of Ruth and Esther are examples. Now, why is this going backwards? Well, it happens to because of which button I push. Somehow or other, that makes a difference. Now, I do have to tell you that I enjoyed preparing for this Sabbath school class. It's not going to follow the quarterly. I hope you read the quarterly. And I also hope that if you have not, if you will go back and read the entire books of Ruth and Esther. There is no way in the amount of time that we have in this Sabbath school class to get the whole rich story of these two women. So I'm just trying to gain a little bit and take out, so bear with me as I go down my own path. I wanted to look at a little bit at the background of the history of Ruth. And the time period, it's a long time ago. Takes the time of Judges, which is around 1200 to 1000 BC. It's a period of instability, and it was before the time of the kings of Saul and David. And it contrasts the chaos in Judges because it shows faithfulness, kindness in a dark time. Naomi, let's get some background for her because she is integral to this. She, by nationality, is an Israelite, and she's from Bethlehem. She's married to Elimelech, and they have two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And because of a famine in Bethlehem, they moved to Moab, which is on the other side of the river. And it's into a neighboring country with a history of tensions with Israel. And there, she unfortunately has both her husband and her sons die. So she becomes a widow in a foreign country with no male support. And in that time period, if you didn't have male support, you were on the lowest end of the poverty scale. In ancient Israel, widows had little protection or provision. That meant they could be exploited. It also meant that they might have food, might not have food, clothing, shelter, and the rest of it. Family loyalty, hospitality, and the idea of a kinsman redeemer were vital, especially to Israel. A close male relative could redeem land or marry a widow to continue the family line. If you want to know more about that, it's laid out in Deuteronomy 25. Ruth and Naomi's survival depends on Ruth's willingness to glean leftover grain in fields, a provision made in the law for the poor of Leviticus 19, 9-10. So again, we're not talking just going down here to Safeway or Walmart and picking out your groceries. We're talking about physical labor in the sun, and you only get what your hands do. So let's look at Ruth now. We've looked a little bit at Naomi. They have famine and they have loss. And we are going to, even though I'm kind of going through this in a recitation style, I'm still going to do my traditional name people and have them read. So Henry, would you read Ruth 1:1-6? And then Anita, would you read Ruth 1:16 and 17 when we get there? He doesn't have, his mic isn't, he left with the mic, so just read it.
Moab. He and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were, I can't pronounce that, Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her sons, 2 sons, and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and had given them food.
So she leaves because of the family leaves because of a famine. They go to Moab where there's food. During the course of time that they're there, the sons married Moabite girls, Ruth and Orpah. Then husband dies and 2 sons die. So she now is 3 widows, Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah. And she decides that she's going to return to Bethlehem because she's heard that the famine is ended, that they now have food. And I imagine she wants to go back home. That's what I would want to do if I was severely depressed, for lack of a better word. And she urges both of her daughter-in-laws to stay in Moab and remarry. That way they would be more secure. Orpah returns home, but Ruth famously refuses. So, Anita, would you read Ruth 1:16 and 17?
But Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me."
I don't think that she left much unsaid. She really was, where you go, I'm going to go, and I'm going to stay with you. Now, I think that that's a great testament to love, but it's also a testament to faith. And I think that you can easily draw the correlation as to the relationship that we should have with God. Where he goes, we will go. Where he lodges, we will lodge. And nothing but death will separate us, and that will only go until the second coming. So they returned to Bethlehem. And Naomi and Ruth returned together. But Naomi is bitter, she's heartbroken, and she even wants her name changed. Don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara. And that's the meaning of bitter. And I can imagine that when you lose your spouse, and you lose your 2 sons, and you're in a country and a culture where you don't have anything now. You don't have any to provide, protect for you. I can see where that would be. So then they go back to Bethlehem, and to provide for them, Ruth gleans grain in the fields. She ends up in the field of Boaz, a kind and wealthy native of Naomi's deceased husband. And Boaz notices Ruth's loyalty and kindness and treats her with respect and generosity. And Al, would you read Ruth 2:17 and 18? Now, the Bible doesn't say so. However, it seems logical to me that it was not a coincidence that Ruth ended up in Boaz's field. I just don't think that that's logical. Ruth 2:17 and 18.
So she gleaned in the field until evening and beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. Then she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. So she brought out and gave her what she had kept back after she had been satisfied.
So I don't know what that measurement is, but it would represent a lot of hard work, probably a day's work. Doesn't say that she got to go home with bags of groceries that included all the fruits and vegetables and all the other stuff that we like. She came home with barley. That was it. So they had barley and water. So we're not talking about necessarily a well-rounded diet, but enough to keep them alive. And then Naomi has a plan after listening to Ruth. He has the right, Boaz does, to marry a widow and preserve the family line. And then, Pastor, would you read Ruth 3:1-4? And then, oh, you didn't bring your glasses, that's right. Well, that's an easy cop-out. Okay. Okay, Anna, would you read Ruth 3:1-4? And then, Delroy, I'm going to have you at the end read Matthew 1:5. Okay? So Ruth comes up with a plan for Boaz. And he is a relative, and therefore he has the right to marry a widow and preserve the family line. And she gives Ruth instructions about how to approach Boaz and ask him to spread his garment over her, a symbolic proposal.
And Naomi her mother-in-law said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, and it may be well with thee? And now it is not Boaz our kinsman, whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winneth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor, but make not thyself known unto the man until he has done eating and drinking. And it shall be when he lieth down, and thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet and lay down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do.
Now, I'm not of the culture of Naomi. This isn't something that in America that we would understand, and it seems kind of, to put it bluntly, weird. But we also have to stop and think that Ruth was not of this culture either. So I'm sure that for her to hear this is not at all what she would think of as, quote, normal. But she did it anyway. She didn't argue. She didn't try and tell Naomi, you're nuts. She went ahead and went on with it. And I think sometimes that we need to do that too if God is talking to us. Sometimes something comes out of left field and we think that it's really gotten into the wrong ballpark. And we have to stop and think that maybe it didn't get in the wrong ballpark. So Boaz is willing, but he wants to make sure that he's first in line. And he gets it, and then he legally marries Ruth. And they have a son named Obed, and he becomes the grandfather of King David, placing Ruth, a foreigner, in the genealogy of Jesus. And so let's read what Matthew 1:5 says.
Matthew 1:5. And Salmon begat Booz of Rechab, and Booz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse. And Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Urias.
So I think that this is kind of interesting if you stop and think about it. Particularly in the time of Jesus, I'm not speaking before that, although it was probably true. The Jews had gotten very much insular. They very much kept themselves away. They considered the Gentiles not good. You could be defiled by being around a Gentile. They wouldn't even eat with them. He wouldn't even go in their home. And yet here we have a foreigner that is in the ancestry of Jesus. So I think it behooves us to stop and think about before we get too excited about being insular. Now we're going to switch and go to Esther. And this is from E.G. White. Occasions of indulgence, such are pictured in the first chapter of Esther, do not glorify God. But the Lord accomplishes his will through men who are nevertheless misleading others. If God did not stretch forth his restraining hand, strange presentations would be seen. But God impresses human minds to accomplish his purpose, even though the one used continues to follow wrong practices. And the Lord works out his plans through men who do not acknowledge his lessons of wisdom. In his hand is the heart of every earthly ruler to turn whithersoever he will, as he turneth the waters of the river. Through the experience that brought Esther to the Medo-Persian throne, God was working for the accomplishment of his purposes for his people. That which was done under the influence of much wine worked out for the good of Israel. So again, we're going to go to the background because I think it's very interesting, and when I get to the end, I think the contrast will show even more. This took place in Persia, mainly in the royal city of Susa, or Shushan, depends upon how you spell it. It was 483 to 473 BC, so almost 1,000 years later. It was at the height of the Persian Empire. Jews were living in exile, scattered across the Persian Empire after the Babylonian captivity in 586. They had some freedoms, but no autonomy. In this book is unique because it does not explicitly mention God, the temple, or religious practices, but it reflects deep faith and divine providence. So now we're going to take the time and we'll go, Bob Sr., would you read Esther 2:15 to 18? And Jean, would you be willing to read Esther 4:14? And Patty, would you read Esther 5:1 to 2? And then Lori, would you read Esther 7:3 and 4? Henry, Esther 7, 9, and 10. Anita, Esther 8:11. And, oh, the pastor has no glasses. So we'll go back to Anna, if you will do Esther 8:17. And we're going to just, in my own cherry picking, work our way through Esther and the main points. That's why I recommend that if you have not read the whole book, you need to read the book. Because in order to try and keep this to a short time period, there's some of the story that I left out. So, first of all, we have, she becomes a queen, and it's at the exact right time to save her people. So, Esther 2:15 to 18.
When the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted the daughter of his uncle Abihail to go to the king. She asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Artaxerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebaveth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet for Esther for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the province and distributed gifts with royal liberty.
If you stop and think about it, at this time period, this is the biggest and the greatest nation in the world. And this didn't take place on Sunday to Sunday. It took place over months. They went out and they collected, they being at the king's direction, the beautiful virgins, with the idea of making the one he chose as queen. And then they had months of preparation. I'm not sure whether Esther put herself forward. I rather doubt it. I think she was selected by whom, I don't know who. But she must have been an incredible person physically, but also in temperament. Often somebody who is very attractive physically doesn't necessarily have a good character to go with it. They're rather proudful and, to use a modern word, snobbish. For her to be selected, be taken into the palace, have the months that are talked about in Esther in preparation, and then to not feel so grand about herself and saying what would go with her. She took the advice of the head eunuch. Says a lot about her disposition and her willingness to obey and her willingness to take other people's advice. But I think she must have been absolutely stunning to have what I would consider a jaded man pick her above everybody else that had come. I just think that we need to stop and think that this is not just the common everyday occurrence. This is, I think, a much bigger deal than anything that we currently do. And then Mordecai tells her, who knows whether you come to the kingdom for such a time. Esther 4:14.
For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this.
And I think it's interesting, the first part of what Jean read, that if you hold your silence, relief is going to come from somewhere else. And you and your family, not just you, will perish. So she risks her life by going to the king uninvited. Esther 5:1-2.
Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther his golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter.
I was just, as I was studying this, thinking about, we have kings in the modern age, not necessarily in America. But you can go in, you can make an appointment. Maybe he wants to see you, maybe he doesn't, but you're not going to get killed over it. So I think that that's interesting. But she risks her life. She knows that if he doesn't, Anna has something to say. No, no. For streaming, they can't hear you if you don't. So Alan needs to put a smile on his face and walk back across.
Sorry, Al. I think we also need to make note that she fasted and prayed for 3 days before she did go into the king. She fasted and prayed for 3 days before she went in to see the king, and I think that was a very important thing that we just don't need to overlook.
I agree. In addition to that, she asked for all of the Jews to do it. So she didn't think that it was just her. She may have been the one walking in there, but she didn't go alone. Sorry, Al, but Bob has something he wants to say.
Well, I think it's interesting. She didn't only say, I will, fast and pray, but she said all those, she had quite a group of, at least women around her. And she said they would even do it. So she must have been quite an evangelist. I mean, to convert, if I can say it that way, all the women that was hers to do whatever they did, and she could speak for them, and it's
The king's pleasure too. They were awaiting the king's pleasure too.
no, we're talking about her
Servants.
ones,
Her servants and handmaiden.
yeah, the ones that she had that she was able to do. So I just, it's if we all could share and have people follow us in loving Jesus, that would be great. And the way, we don't have any idea how many was in her, what do they call that?
Entourage.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think also that those of us who have been born and raised in the United States and we don't have royalty, and even the royalties that are in the world right now do not have the authority that was embodied in being the king of this nation, that his word was law. And once the law was given, it couldn't be broken. That's a lot of power, for lack of a better word, in one person. And so I think this story, we need to kind of step out of our cultural way of thinking to realize just what a challenge this was for Esther. This wasn't just like, well, I'm going to have a grilled cheese sandwich even if you don't like it. So she goes to the king. She asks for a banquet with Haman. And then she asks for the second banquet with Haman. And so now she reveals her Jewish identity, which until now she hadn't had been told. And so, Lori?
Esther 7, 3 and 4. Then Queen Esther answered and said, If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue. although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss.
Again, she didn't ask for her own life. She asked for the life of her and her people. She could have just asked for her own life. Make an exception with me, please. But no, she included all of the exiles. And then I'm leaving out the story about where Haman's pleading with her, where the king's so angry he goes into the gardens for a while, probably comes back out, and then one of his servants suggested that Haman be hung on the very gallows that he had prepared to hang Mordecai on. So the Jews go from being marked for death to defeating their enemies, and that's Esther 8:11. Henry? Aren't you supposed to? Oh, I'm sorry. Esther 7, 9 to 10.
Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated.
Sometimes I think the irony in the Bible is just exquisite. Not only was he hanged, but he was hung on the very instrument that supposedly was going to kill his enemy. Could have been done many different ways, but kind of like the sting in the scorpion's tail. And then let's go to the Jews go from being marked for death to defeating their enemies. Esther 8:11.
Before I read it, it's interesting. I was reading this week that gallows was 75 feet high. Amazing.
He didn't want just him dead. He wanted everybody to know he was doing it.
Right. The ego.
Mm-hmm.
By these letters, the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions.
So Haman wanted them just exterminated. Genocide is what we call it nowadays. So the Feast of Purim was established to celebrate their deliverance. And then this goes to Anna. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
We're studying about prophecy, and these two stories illustrate what we probably will experience as we get to the close of time. We're, as Adventists, especially those who keep the Sabbath, maybe others included, will become targets of the vast majority of the world. And this story also gives us hope, because God always defends his children. So a lot of people are, well, I'm scared about this, and we study about prophecy because if this is going to happen and this is going to happen. I think we need to go past the problem and to the solution where God intervenes and saves his people. And these are two wonderful stories to illustrate the fact that they were under both individuals' very dire circumstances. The Jews in Esther's time were condemned to die, but under a law that, quote, according to their regulations, couldn't be changed. But then they could have a counter law, which he passed, which would allow them to fight for themselves, and they overcame. And they were able to celebrate the fact that God still moves. Even though God is not mentioned there, the story is very clear that God is involved in the lives of his people. So we need to take courage in the fact as we read these books, these stories, where does it apply to us to give us courage as we come to the close of time is a very important part, I think.
I think that's excellent. Yes, I agree. And so now let's talk about what they did after they had defeated their enemies.
So Esther 8:17, and in every province and in every city, whether the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for fear of the Jews fell upon them.
In my research for this, I found that the name Purim, and I'm not for sure we're pronouncing it correctly, but that's the way my English does it, is actually the Hebrew word for lots. And it represents the lots that Haman cast to choose the day that the Jews would be annihilated. So this is kind of a reference right back to their own language. Again, I think sometimes we lose something in reading the Bible by not reading it in the original version. And next I hope you can read it. I kind of made it a little small to fit it. And I thought it would take the closing minutes to kind of just think about the differences, the contrasts, the similarities between Ruth and Esther. Ruth only has 4 chapters. Esther has 10. It's in the time of the Judges versus the Persian Empire. One has to do with a rural Bethlehem in Moab. The other one is in the king's place in Persia. We have a Moabite Gentile outsider to Israel, and you have a Jewish insider living in exile. You have a loyal daughter-in-law who becomes an ancestor of King David, and a courageous queen who saves the Jewish people. You have loyalty, devotion, humility, courage, wisdom, and boldness. Personal hardship and poverty, widowhood, foreign status, national threat of genocide against the Jews. God's name is directly mentioned in Ruth, but not in Esther, but it is implied. Marriage, Ruth marries Boaz, and Esther marries the king. God provides through Boaz and Ruth's loyalty, and God works behind the scenes through Esther's position. Ruth is the ancestor of Jesus, as we read in Matthew 1:5, and Esther was the savior of the Jewish people during the Persian Empire. Ruth embraces Israelite faith and people, and Esther embraces her Jewish identity at risk to self and also the entire Jewish nation at that time. Ruth doesn't have a formal ceremony or holiday or festival, but Esther does, and it is celebrated today, and it's usually in February, March. So I thought I would just open it up. We haven't done much talking around the room today. What are your thoughts when you stop and think about the similarities and the contrast between these two? Come on, make Al walk.
Well, I never would have thought of these without seeing it like this. This is really helpful because there's so much in common, even if it's a contrast. There's so much in common between the two stories. It's amazing. So I would like a copy of this.
Okay, I can give it to you. Anybody else? Bob.
Well, I was listening to Sean, And both of these, Ruth and Esther, there's a person who is against and one who's for. And he relates that all back to our relationship with Jesus. Jesus came and died for us. The devil was there, says, here, I'll give you all of this back if you will just bow down. And so the aspect is, that in this world, we always have our advocate is Jesus, and then we always have the adversary. And, he kind of picked out in both of these, which he has through the quarter. But, it's amazing how much the Bible, I've studied, and I am not all the way done yet, and I've been doing it for a month or more, Zephaniah. And, I don't know how many times I've read Zephaniah in my lifetime, but God was even telling people back through him. If you go and read that, it's only 3 chapters long, but God is telling them about the end of the world. And I had never connected that. I always just connected it with the Jews. So God has been telling us for literally thousands of years how much he loves us, what he's going to do for us, what he won't do for us, and so it still comes down like these 2 women, they both chose the good side. But, there's the Bible is full of the people who didn't choose the good side. And so I was just reading this week again in Revelation, we're going to experience, and we are experiencing. And, as we see, as I listen to people who I think are a lot smarter than I am and what they see coming, it just makes me feel like that, we're not far from the devil's appearance as Christ. And we as a people know this in advance. And when we see it, we know Christ's return is very close. And, and we believe it is too, but it's so easy to become, what's the word? Where we just, complacent, that's a good word. And we've got to be ready to stand just as Ruth and Esther did. We got to be ready to stand on what God says and not, because it says if it were possible, the very elect will fall for this, for the devil and all these grand things he's going to do. So I think for us it's just we need to study not only about Ruth and Esther, but read the books of the Bible as if this is Jesus talking to us, and we need to be grounded so we won't be deceived.
So I thought that I would point out some similarities and differences that I saw that were enough to kind of close the discussion. Both are women of action and character. Each faces hardship and makes a life-altering choice. and their stories highlights God's faithfulness and the role of human decision in divine plans. Ruth is a personal story of an individual redemption and family. Esther is a national story of political courage and deliverance. Ruth is a foreigner who joins Israel, and Esther is an Israelite living in a foreign land. So again, I'm going to say, like I did at the very beginning, if you didn't this week while you were studying the Bible, the Sabbath School quarter, to read the entire books of Ruth and Esther, I think I couldn't more highly recommend that you go and do that. Let's close with prayer. Our Father, thank you for giving us the stories of Ruth and Esther. Thank you for giving us the differences and the similarities, but both point to your providence, your working, and most of all, your interest in our salvation. Help us to internalize it. Help us, too, to make the decisions that changes our life for eternity. In Jesus' name, amen.